Indicted Fiction, the most untrue crime podcast out there. Everything you're about to hear is fictional, but the feelings she may experience are 100% real. The Case of Adam's Murder, Episode 7, Abomination, recorded 2 a.m., October 28th. My parents were proud of me this morning. They think I'm finally taking charge of my life by scouting out a second job. My mom told me to take it easy, not to overwork myself, and my dad patted me on the back, a sure sign that he's proud of his little girl. I'm glad they didn't know I was walking into the lion's den. I waited out on the second floor balcony, chatting with my neighbor. Martha's a good woman, older, never had kids, but she'd give the shirt off her back despite the hardened look of her face. Oh, and she smokes like a freight train. I tried to keep the conversation light, wanting to quell my jitters. I almost reached over and snatched the cigarette from betwixt her fingers. I would have inhaled all of it in one drag, but I'm not much of a smoker. Joel's car rolled into the parking lot, so I said my goodbyes and ran down the stairs, hoping this was not my last day on Earth. I couldn't bring my gun with me. I was fearful someone would find it, and I didn't need another reason to be scared. Not to mention, it still sat in the hollow of a tree in Star Bend. Hopefully. Getting in Joel's car, I wish I had a camera. He was just as nervous as I was, and we gave each other the exact sheepish smile before he pulled out into traffic. "How are you today?" he asked. He never asked how I was doing. It boosted my confidence to know he was nervous, too, and I was curious why he was so nervous. "So you started working?" he asked, as if he didn't just start working recently. I told him how Mom got me a job at Supermart, and when I heard he was working for Ricardo, it intrigued me. "Why?" His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I said, "Because if you're willing to tie yourself down to a job, it must be worth spending time at." He instantly relaxed, even smirked a bit. "Yeah, I've never been the committing type," he said. I thought, only been the committing crimes type. By the time we got to the Saki warehouse, we were both somewhat at ease, and at the least, we were more relaxed than we were when I first got into the car. Joel skipped the customer parking lot, then even skipped the workers' parking spaces. He drove around back and parked alongside some very nice, all-black cars. We got out and he led me to a door, letting me go in first. I gasped. A sweet odor hit me square in the face, and Joel laughed. He said, "Yeah, it takes a while to get used to that." Joel walked in around me, guiding me down a hall. I had never seen him dressed so nicely. There was no way he was working on the line. I figured he must have an office in here somewhere and that Mama Maria lied. He knocked on a door and waited a second. A gruff voice said, "Come in." I knew I would have to see Ricardo again. I knew it, but it didn't stop me from being scared. Something in me is convinced he killed my brother, and if he wasn't the one to do the damage, he was at least there to orchestrate it. When Ricardo saw me, his face lit up. "Ah, the nice girl from Supermart. What are you here for?" He asked nicely with a large smile on his face. I know he knows my name. Joel answered for me, and there began the awkward hiring process that I knew wasn't professional, but very typical in small towns. Just look how I got a job at Supermart. The conversation went from me to Joel to Ricardo, from Ricardo to me to Joel, and on and on and on. I felt as if maybe they were waiting for me to crack, like they thought I was going to slip up and say I was there hunting for clues about my brother's death. Finally, I mentioned it. Ricardo asked why I wanted to work there for the 10th time. That may or may not be an exaggeration, but I answered with, "Well, ever since my brother's death, I've been cooped up in the house. My mom got me a job at Supermart, but it's only part-time. Here I paused for a sigh. I just don't want to be home anymore." Ricardo's eyes had softened. My original answer was I was looking for more money, but I think they both knew it was something more than that. So I made it more than that. I saw the picture of Ricardo and his 3 daughters on the wall. They looked to be 10, 14, and one close to my age. So I ground it in with, "His room is right across from mine, so I can't have my door open anymore." I felt real tears sprout in my eyes. It was tragic, but exactly what I needed. And my window overlooks the liquor store, and that was the last place he had gone to before he had died. I frantically wiped away the tears, acting as if I was embarrassed. Joel stepped forward and had the audacity to put an arm around my shoulders. I continued, "I've been shutting myself in my room and staring at the ceiling for days." Ricardo's eyes seemed to have watered, so I put my arm around Joel and ended with, "Luckily, friends like Joel have been keeping me company, and when I found out he was working here, I figured it would help to have a friend in my workplace." Ricardo nodded, clearing his throat, and offered me a position at the front desk. Their last clerk had been fired, and even a part-time clerk was better than none. I asked if he was really okay with it being part-time, stating that I could quit the supermart job, and he assured me it was perfect. A knot had formed in my stomach, but Ricardo graciously showed me to my desk. It was in utter disarray. He said the last clerk had disappeared, and he hadn't been able to find a replacement, so all the paperwork had started piling up. My first responsibility was to clean the desk and organize all the papers on top of it. Ricardo patiently explained what forms were for what and what to do with them while Joel stood by with a watchful eye. Ricardo's final words were, "If you find a USB, give it to me immediately. Do not plug it in and look at what's on it." Well, obviously it had a video on it. Ricardo's little slip had my curiosity piqued. I nodded, but I knew if I found it, I would watch it. The USA Unholy Slaying Agency series combines horror, action, and the occult. It is about an agency that recruits combat veterans from various branches of service to apprehend or neutralize supernatural terrors across the United States. Guy Quintero's debut novel, A Whisper in the Dark, is about an investigation into the ritualistic murder of a psychically sensitive woman. Ghost Team finds themselves in a demonic web of deceit, where they enter a brutal life or death struggle while trying to uncover a dark truth. Join the hunt at www.guyquintero.com/HQ. The desk was a wreck, but I had it cleaned in under an hour. Sorted all the files and forms and paperwork like a pro. I'd gotten to the last bit of garbage, throwing out any sticky notes I thought weren't of importance. Her name was Wanda. She had adorable handwriting, but she wrote notes for everything. Alright, I'm stalling. It's been a long day, and I don't want to admit that I watched my brother get murdered on a conveyor belt. The USB had been sitting under one of Wanda's 50 million sticky notes. I saw it, made eye contact with it, and my heart raced. What could be on it? What would I be watching? I had almost cracked laughing when I thought it could be a sex tape of Ricardo. If I thought a video condemning him to the murder of my brother would be great for blackmailing, I could only imagine the power of a sex tape. So I snatched it before anyone came strolling through the doors or from the hall. I had seen a brand new pack of 3 USBs in the drawers somewhere, so I grabbed one and shoved the packaging with the other 2 deep into the trash. At this point I thought it was either chance death or risk ignorance. So I copied the files from the first USB and into the next, making sure that all the files remained on the first USB. There were so many videos, and all the thumbnails were black. Ignorance is bliss, isn't it? I watched as the files slowly uploaded and almost prayed to keep people away. I'm surprised that Ricardo would trust me with so much. I thought maybe it was nothing. I thought maybe it was a sex tape. A lot of them. I didn't expect to see what I saw. The day passed in agony as I waited with that second USB in my shoe. I filled out my own paperwork as well as 3 other new hires they had. I was told by a man delivering boxes of paper that Saki is growing fast. I think he saw how many people were waiting in line to be helped and was only trying to make a polite statement. It really only irked me. So this whole time I have been under the impression that Ricardo is the top dog. Boy, was I wrong. I waited a while after uploading the USB before giving Ricardo his. I wanted to get rid of my jitters before approaching him with it. He had smiled and thanked me, saying, "I knew you would give it to me right after finding it. Where was it?" I lied and told him it was under the keyboard. I even gave a fake laugh and said, "Had I not spilled the jar of paper clips, I never would have found it." I think I've gotten pretty good at lying. I had gone back out to my desk, preparing myself to organize the files Wanda had saved on the desktop. She must have been a scatterbrain. But instead, I was greeted with a horde of men shortly after sitting down. One of them was obviously of more importance than the others, as the men seemed to crowd around him. He was short, much shorter than even the next shortest man in the room. Even with his small stature, he appeared to know his presence. Ricardo came out from his office in a hurry, his loud, quick footsteps only muffled by the thunderous machinery outside the door to my left. They spoke in Spanish, of which I only knew a few words, and they were mainly food items learned from Mama Maria. None of the words I heard pertained to food. The only word I recognized was muerte. It seemed to be directed at Ricardo. That was until I heard Joel's name. The small man directed his sharp gaze at me, so I pretended to be busy typing on the computer. I ended up typing out some gibberish into a blank email that is probably still in my drafts. Ricardo was sweating bullets. He wrung his hands around themselves and nodded after every word this smaller man said. It was astonishing to see such a brutal-looking man worn down to a nervous, submissive pet. He clung to every word like his life relied on it, and I realized it probably did. That was when the smaller man pointed to me. I looked up to him, stunned. Ricardo jumped to my desk, putting a hand on my shoulder. He spoke very quickly, still in Spanish. My heart raced as I wondered whether my life was on the line. The man walked over under the eyes of everyone in the room. He smiled and reached over the desk, taking my hand, and said, "Hello, I'm Saul, the owner of this plant. Nice to meet you." His smile was soft, but his eyes were vacant of any life. I shook his cold, calloused hand and wondered if he could feel how terrified I was. Saul nodded when I answered with my name. I omitted my last name, introducing myself as Abby. He and his men followed an almost trembling Ricardo down the hall and out of my range of hearing. It was just about time for me to clock out when Joel came up behind me and laid a hand on my shoulder. I had been absent-mindedly reading an email for the third time and didn't hear him approach, so his touch made me jump. I think he did it on purpose. He told me to clock out a few minutes early so we could get on the road. As I grabbed my things, I thought about the USB in my shoe. I had done a bit of walking around with no problem, but walking all the way to his car and up the stairs to my apartment was sure to be an issue. I told him I had to pee first, and he was clearly irritated but let me go. As I peed, I slipped the USB out from my shoe and tucked it safely into a pad that I then tucked into the pouch I have for all my pads and panty liners. Then that went into my purse. I hoped that Joel would have no reason to ask for a pad. When I looked up from my purse, I spotted a small table in the stall. On the table was a bottle of air freshener and a pump of lotion, but the thing that caught my attention was the box of tissue besides those. It was black and shiny. Most tissue boxes are brightly colored and made of cardboard. I feared that if I stared too long, I would spot a red LED light. So I quickly pulled up my pants, washed my hands, and left with a sick feeling in my gut. Joel's car stunk of cigarette smoke. I wondered what he had done all day, considering Mama Maria's, "Oh, he's a line worker," statement was clearly a lie. He took the long way home, avoiding the freeway and driving me through farmland. I mainly stared down the ditch on the side of the road and wondered how many decomposing bodies were in there. I wondered if any were from the hands of Joel or Ricardo. Just as I turned to stare at Joel, he spoke up. "Maybe I'm becoming my mother, reading too much into things, but I think Joel killed Adam. I'm almost certain," as he said, "I just want to apologize about your brother." That was all he said, nothing more. I nodded and he turned back to driving. What was he supposed to apologize for, other than being the one to start his addiction, obviously? What was there for him to be sorry for? And for him to address Adam as your brother, what a strange thing for him to do. If the roles were reversed, it would be no issue for Joel to address me as your sister to Adam, as we weren't close. But for him to do so for Adam was strikingly odd. I clutched my purse tightly and kept my mouth shut the entire drive, and as I clambered out of his car into my apartment's parking lot, I felt like I could breathe again. He drove off without a word, and I wondered where I was going to watch the USB. We have no laptop or desktop, and I don't have a USB converter for my phone. As I got to the top of the stairs, I realized there was only one option: the TV. My dad frequently brought home USB drives with newer movies. He said he got them from his friends, but hey, not my business. So he has a small USB reader hooked up to our TV. Only problem was finding some alone time. I really didn't want to launch a porn file of Ricardo in front of my parents, but deep down I knew there would be something much darker on this drive. I walked in, expecting my parents to ask how it went, only to find a dark, empty apartment. The sun had already begun to set, and my heart shuddered as I wondered where they were. A note on the kitchen counter provided all the details I would need. They were over at the neighbor's apartment to play cards, and usually their sessions lasted until at least 3 a.m. I had time. You know what else I had? Apprehension, and lots of it. A suspicious USB from a very suspicious organization, and I got a front row seat to its contents in my pitch black living room, all alone. I was tempted to call Chuck to see if he would come watch it with me. Then I realized how romantic he would find the setting. Oh, a darkened room and mysterious tapes to watch together? She must be courting me. I don't know, I just think that's something he would think. So I sat on the couch as the USB loaded and clutched the pillow beside me with a white-knuckled fist. A scream like no other I had ever heard filled our apartment. My eyes were frozen onto the screen. I found myself unable to tear myself from the image. A woman hung from ropes bound around her ankles and wrists behind her back. She was slowly being lowered down onto a conveyor belt. The usual smooth surface had been removed and replaced with jagged chains. It moved much faster than any conveyor belt I had ever seen. 2 men moved into the scene from out of frame. Each wore plastic suits, not like the biohazard suits, but like the ones painters wear. The only thing I could see about either of them was where their eyes peeked out from behind their goggles. The woman screamed, begging for her life, and I was finally released from my terror for a few seconds. I scrambled for the remote, hoping to turn it down before the neighbors heard. The 2 men grabbed her by her elbows, and as she came nearer to the conveyor belt of doom, I realized what they were about to do. They braced their hands on her back and forced her down into the raucous teeth. They held her steady as the metal thrashed into her skin, tearing it free and carrying it away. Blood began to run down to the floor, creating puddles of crimson to contrast against the white linoleum. She wailed until those wails turned into gurgles. With each pass of the conveyor, the floor grew darker and darker. I watched in horror as the 2 men pressed their weight down onto her back, and her writhing slowed to a stop. I heard her take her last gasping breath, something that must have been autonomous, for she was far gone. The video cut out. I could finally hear how I was panting in those few seconds of silence and darkness. The next video began. He screamed so loud. I'd never heard him scream like that before. Adam, in nothing but a pair of shorts, hung above the conveyor. It was clean, and the floor below it shone like a pearl. The 2 men approached him from out of frame. I was about to watch my brother die. Finally, Adam formed words out of his screams. "I can pay you all the money you need if you just let me go. Please." "Money? Please, my family needs me." I waited for the men to call him a drug addict, to tell him his family didn't need him. Only the hum of the conveyor met his words, and I think that was worse. He cried as they lowered him down, and I cried with him. Money. It was all for money. I knew his addiction would kill him, but I always assumed it would be an overdose. He was only inches from the fast-moving teeth when the front doorknob jiggled. I shut the TV off and laid on the couch. My parents were home earlier than expected. They crept inside. I could hear them tiptoeing around. My mom whispered, "She must be in bed. Must have been a long day." She sounded happy, like she was proud of me. When the light flicked on, they both gasped, and someone shut it off quickly. Tears threatened to force their way between my closed eyelids, and I trembled as I kept them back. Mom and Dad went into their room and shut the door. I sobbed, crawling off the couch. I wept silently as I removed the USB from the port and sailed into my bedroom. I wanted to smash the USB, but it was the only proof I had. Not that I think the police here would help. In bed, I tossed and turned. I think I may have fallen asleep for 15 minutes, but I woke in a cold sweat. I wanted to talk to someone about it, or at least tell you, but I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. Sometime after 1 a.m., I fell asleep, but here I am at 2:30, awake as ever. Money? Paper that the government prints on was worth my brother, was worth all those people on that USB. I have no words. Thanks for listening. Be sure to tune in next Friday for Adam's Murder, Episode 8, Confession. Don't forget, Adam's Murder will be published as a paperback and ebook on October 7th, 2022, when the finale of Indicted Fiction Season 1 airs. Preorder is open, so be sure to head over to my website and pre-order your signed copy today. If you'd like to read the transcribed audio diary of Abigail Drummer, go to my website, authoralianapoe.com/blog. Each episode is posted on my blog under Indicted Fiction.